Welcome to this week's episode of Kent's Garage. You know, I've spent the better part of this past week working on my 560 SEC, and you should see the engine compartment. I think I spent about 8 hours. Now, that wasn't all just working, some of it was filming, but that's about how long I spent. Maybe 6 hours of actual work detailing the engine compartment and detailing the engine. I want you to take a look at it now. I'll just flash a before picture here and then take a look at how nice this engine looks after spending all this effort. Was it worth it? Well, you're going to have to decide if it's worth it for you. I think it's worth it for me. Every time I open the hood, I'm going to go, wow, look at that. Look at that beautiful V8. And I'm just wrapping up an on-demand video that will be available on my website showing all the products I use, all the chemicals, all the brushes, everything, all the procedures that I went through to get that engine looking like that. You know, I bought this car. I mentioned to the owner that I didn't think the rear suspension was working that well. And he says, what do you mean? It feels fine to me. Well, I don't think it feels so fine. Okay, there's something wrong there. There's something wrong either with the struts. I don't think it's the nitrogen spheres, but we may have a pump pressure issue. But first, before I do anything else, I want to flush the system out. We had to repair and replace some hoses, and I've got a video up on that that shows you some of the hoses we had to replace. I'm not done with it by any means, but I've got to get the car moved outside here because I got to start it up, and then I'm going to go through this whole flushing procedure for the power steering fluid and for the self-leveling suspension fluid. I think power steering fluid and self-leveling suspension fluid are some of the most neglected items. You can't believe some of the terrible fluid I've seen inside the power steering pumps and inside the self-leveling suspension. Now on these cars, these self-leveling suspension parts are getting pretty expensive. And if you have a 560 SEC, I'm going to do a video series on how to replace the components in the rear suspension for the hydraulic self-leveling. Because I think if you have one of these cars, you need to do this now while these parts are still available. And that's the hydraulic struts and the spheres. You know, someday these parts are not going to be available, and that's going to be really tough if you own a 560 SEC or any other Mercedes-Benz that has self-leveling suspension. So, you know, I'm going to go through the process of changing the struts out, troubleshooting the leveling valve, rebuilding the pump on the engine, and so on. That's going to be, you know, a couple months down the road. But I just wanted to mention that because we're not going to be finished with this SEC. I want to move it out once I finish these flushes of these two fluids, and then I want to get the S600 in here to give it a preliminary inspection on the lift. So that's one of the reasons why I'm kind of, okay, I've worked on this one long enough, let's get the next one in here. And let me show you some of the other things we've been doing around here this past week. Usually one or two plugs is going to tell the story of the rest of them, so I usually find the easiest one to remove, which on this engine is on this right side forward. And the first thing you need to do is pull this ignition wire off, and never grab a hold of the wire and pull on the wire. You'll pull that right out. And this is where this clamping tool that we build here in my shop comes in so handy. Not only am I able to remove these ignition leads with this, but I've been able to get into remove really difficult to access hoses like the hose on the SLS or the self-leveling suspension that goes from the tank over to the hydraulic pump on the front of the engine. So if you use this type of tool, you're going to pull this ignition lead off without damage just by lightly grabbing it and twisting it and pulling it off. The next thing you want to do is, before you ever remove a spark plug, because there could be quite a bit of dirt around that area, and you do not want that going into the engine, you're going to come in and blow the cavity right on the cylinder where the spark plug seats. Okay, now I'll get my spark plug socket. Okay, let's take a look. All right, this one looks really nice. That's obviously almost a brand new plug. And look at how it's burning. You see that light brown color? There's no black soot. The black soot is going to indicate a rich mixture. And if there's an oily film on it, that means you're probably burning oil by the piston rings or by the valve guide seals. So when you look at this plug, right there, that's about as good as it gets. And I suspect that the rest of them look just like this. Now when you reinstall the plug, there is quite a controversy about using anti-seize compound, because it can get down and get on the electrodes. It can also foul up your O2 sensor. If you choose to use any anti-seize compound at all, you want to put just a little teeny dab right out in here. In this case, this is pretty clean, so I'm not going to be using anti-seize compound here, but this is a trick I do use, and I highly recommend it, is when you reinstall your plugs, don't use a socket. Use a short piece of 3/8" hose like this, so that when you set the plug down in there, you can feel it. You can feel it thread in. See that? It's trying to cross thread. So I'm gonna realign it here. I'm gonna kind of get the same angle as the plug behind it, and then I'm gonna start turning it in. And if it won't go in by hand with a hose like this, then there's something wrong. Now I'll run it in the rest of the way with the ratchet wrench. You can see I'm not having to work this. If you are, there's something wrong again. Do not force the plugs into these spark plug holes. You can strip the threads in the head, and then you've really got a problem. If you need to torque your plugs, you can check the torque specs and the service manual, but I've done this so many times I can kind of feel it. I can kind of feel that washer crush. Okay. I'm going to reinstall the plug wire. Okay, that passed the test flying colors. Recently, I've just made a couple of changes to my pressure bleeder tank, and I want to explain these changes to you, particularly for those of you who have purchased this brake bleeder pressure tank in the past, and now you want to be able to use it to set the injection pump timing on your old Mercedes diesel. So what I needed to do when I started coming up with this idea of having some different attachments for the basic bleeder tank that you use to bleed your brakes with, I decided, well, I was going to have a way that you could connect and disconnect the attachment. Okay, follow me? So originally, the tank was shipped like this. It just had the hose coming out of the tank down and directly connecting to the cap that goes on the brake fluid reservoir. So that's fine. If you're only going to use the tank for bleeding your brakes or flushing your brake fluid out every couple years, that's fine. But now, you can use this tank, same tank, to adjust the injection pump timing on your 1985 and older Mercedes diesel. And by using pressure in the system, what I mean is I'm pressurizing fuel system, you can get some really consistent and accurate results when you're trying to get that timing just on the money, so to speak, just on the money. So what I did was, about a month ago, I decided, well, let me see if I can provide a fitting that would allow you to remove the end that goes on the brake fluid reservoir and connect a hose that would go onto the injection pump. And I came up with this brass fitting with 2 nylon barbed fittings that could screw into it. And of course, you could screw them in and screw them out. But the more I played around with this, the more I was concerned that with people screwing these nylon fittings in and out, it's very easy to cross-thread them. What happens if you damage them? Of course, if you're pressurizing the tank with either diesel fuel or brake fluid, you don't want it spilling out of the fitting, and particularly brake fluid. Can you imagine if you set this all up and start pressurizing the tank to flow that brake fluid into the brake fluid master cylinder reservoir, and all of a sudden you've got drips of brake fluid coming out and going down in your engine compartment? I know that wouldn't make you very happy. So I decided, okay, I'm going to try to make a change that would prevent the possibility of leak. Now there's always a possibility, but I'm going to minimize them by eliminating the threaded fitting. So now, what you will receive is the pressure bleeder tank. It'll look like this. It'll have a barbed fitting with 2 zip ties, all the way up to 30 pounds PSI, which is way above what you should be using for bleeding or flushing your brakes, this isn't going to come off or it isn't going to leak. You could probably push the hose onto the barb fittings and it'd be just fine, but I recommend every time you make the change that you use zip ties. For those of you who have the original tank, I'm even going to put a barbed fitting in the injection pump timing kit so that you can cut yours and modify it. If you notice here, all we've done is we've cut the hose about 6 inches from the nipple going into the cap, and then we've installed this little barbed fitting and put zip ties on it. So I think it's pretty easy to make that switch over. You know, if you've used this for brake bleeding, and I talk about in my instructions, make sure you clean the tank out with alcohol and hot soapy Dawn dishwashing liquid and let it dry out before you put diesel fuel in it. And I think it's a good idea to always keep the tank clean. Don't leave brake fluid in it for long periods of time. Don't leave diesel fuel in it for long periods of time. The brake fluid will go bad on you, so you might as well dump it back into the can, clean the tank out so it's ready to go for whatever you're going to use this pressure tank for. And I'm even working on a couple of other attachments now for things that you can do on your car that you would have never expected you could do it with a pressurized tank. So that's coming down the road, okay. So we got to start these babies up, you know. Of course, you can't let the beast hibernate all winter. Sweetheart. She woke right up from a brief sleep. My favorite product this week are these new shop towels that I've started using just recently. In fact, I really got into them this past week when finishing the detailing on this 560 SCC engine. So let me show you now why these are not only the product of the week, but probably the product of the month, because I always have cars to detail around here. In this video, I want to do a little paper towel shootout, okay? This all started when I was detailing the engine compartment in this 560 SCC, and over the years I've used countless of these blue shop towels, white paper towels, and you know the routine. You end up wiping on them, and if you get them wet with any kind of chemical, they just fall apart, and particularly things like brake cleaner or lacquer thinner, they really fall apart fast. So recently I've been looking at other options for cleaning cloths when detailing an engine, when repairing an engine, and when detailing an engine compartment. The first criteria is I really wanted something that was lint-free. You know, when you're wiping like down in here in the throttle body and you're cleaning off other critical parts, when you have parts disassembled, you don't want lint on the paper towel. So the white paper towels have always been just for cleaning up grease and grime because they're cheap, okay? I like to be cheap. The blue paper towels hold up a little bit better. Now you have these, they're called white rags by Toolbox. But I've been doing a lot of research and I've been doing some testing. I've purchased 3 or 4 different types of what you call space age or modern technology paper towels. And that's what we're going to demonstrate here. We're going to kind of take these all through the test, and then I'm going to show you what I came up with and what towel I now prefer. For this initial test, I'm just going to use water with a little bit of dishwashing liquid in it. I'm not even going to bring in the harsh chemicals like this brake cleaner here, maybe later. But for right now, I think we can fully see what these paper towels can hold up to with just water, a little bit of soap. Let's start out with the white ones. Now, of course, if you're cleaning, you know, and wiping things off, but as soon as they get wet, and I'm going to hold this in here for about 15 seconds. All right, now there it is. Now let's just lightly pull on it. You can see it just immediately tears, and if you let this sit for, let's say, another 2 minutes, it even gets worse. Okay, let's try a piece of the blue shop towel next. Just soak it in here for 10 to 15 seconds. Now, if you've used these blue shop towels, you know they tend to be a little bit stronger than the kitchen white paper towels. But really, once they get wet, they're not much better. And that's what I found is these are okay as long as you don't get them too damp with either water, soap, purple power, or some other chemical. But once you get them damp with something, these start tearing just as badly as those white kitchen paper towels. Okay, the next one is I'm going to pull out one of these toolbox white rags. The consistency of these feels a little bit like the blue shop towel, but they're a little bit rougher. So let's soak this one up, see what happens. Okay, let's try this one. Oh, wow. This is even weaker than the blue shop towel. Once again, I'm not saying these are bad paper towels in themselves. They just don't hold up to rigorous engine and engine compartment detailing and cleaning automotive parts. They're probably fine for cleaning glass, you know, wiping down other things. They're not good for plastics because most of these paper towels will scratch plastics. Let's bring in the one I've been using recently. And when you look at this, it looks like a paper towel. It's made by DuPont, and they are not cheap. Remember earlier I said I like to be cheap, but at some point we've all learned that being cheap isn't always a good idea, okay? So let's soak this one up. While that's soaking, I should tell you one thing I like about this. It's really designed to clean aircraft windshields, and it won't scratch plastic. So if you have glasses or other plastic face shields around the shop, these are ideal to do that type of cleaning with. All right, let's pull this out. It's pretty wet. Now let's pull on it. Now I'm not saying that you can't tear this. If I've really ripped hard, but just working it back and forth like this and pulling on it, notice that it's not tearing. It has a high absorption rate, and it actually has pretty good squeezability. So if you're doing a lot of cleaning where you've got a lot of moisture, you can wring these things out and reuse them. But I tell you, even after letting this thing sit for a while, look at that. It doesn't want to tear. So you can see I found a new friend here in the shop. In fact, I'm just going to spend the money and get a number of these shop towels. You know, I'll still use these for cleaning up oil spots and grease spots on the floor and things like that. But basically, for any serious cleaning now, I'm going to go with these cloths right here because they are amazing, literally amazing. So I'll put a link in the show more of the description if you want to purchase some of these where you can buy them. And I think you'll be just as impressed with these as I have been. As a parting shot, let's see how well this new towel holds up when applying brake cleaner to it. Let's really soak it up with a brake cleaner, and then we're going to get down in here and clean this out thoroughly. I'll drag it around down in here, try to actually tear it on a couple of sharp edges. Now, if you were to use the blue shop towel for this, I guarantee you'd be leaving some pieces of blue shop towel down in this intake. All right, I'm going to try to yank it out of here. Look at that. Still in one piece. Isn't that amazing? And even with the brake cleaner, you know, it still doesn't want to tear. So now you understand. These are my favorite towels of the year. This past week, I went to take a look at this 1980 300 SD. I saw the ad on Craigslist. It said body damage. So I called the guy, asked a few questions, and it sounded like it should be something I should go take a look at. Well, walking up to it doesn't look too pretty. But the closer I looked at this, I began to realize that this car could be fixed. You know, the bumper was straight, it did not hit the frame rails, and looking at it from the front, you can see that it missed the suspension and the front bumper. But the thing that interested me most was the report of 120,000 miles. So I started this baby up when I got there, and literally the oil filler cap would not move while the engine's running. So I think the mileage is pretty close. And the car is not bad other than that damage, and I really like the interior. I know some of you are going to say this is kind of ugly, but let me tell you, this is kind of unique, especially the carpet color. So it might be kind of fun. So I'm going to throw this out there. What do you think? Should I buy this car or not? So if I get 100 requests to purchase this car in the next 7 days, you may end up seeing this on next week's episode of Kent's Garage. So that about wraps this video up. You know, I've got a few more hoses and a few more wiring looms to do here, but let me tell you, take a look now. Can you believe the difference? As a final parting shot, I'm going to show you a couple before scenes before we started this engine and engine compartment, and then I'm going to finish this video showing you what this engine looks like now. So best wishes to you on all your detailing projects. That's okay, come on out, I'm just doing a test.
You need to run a business staircase. That's how I cut it before.
Yeah, no, it's enough. As long as it's in the center. It's nice that, you know, they can adjust it a little bit, but just the lathe, right? Otherwise we'd be sawing, sanding, sawing.
Sanding, sawing,